The press briefing room was packed, cameras rolling, journalists seated waiting for the next big headline. It was supposed to be a standard session, another round of questioning, another attempt to put the administration on the defensive. But today was different. Sitting at the podium was Karoline Leavitt, unshaken, prepared, and ready for whatever the media had to throw at her. And at the center of it all, an NBC reporter, known for his aggressive style, eager to corner her with a question that he believed would expose the administration's flawed deportation policies. He leaned forward, microphone in hand, voice laced with certainty. Does the administration really believe that separating families and deporting hardworking immigrants is the right move? Do you honestly think this is what America stands for? It was the kind of question designed to trap, to force Karoline into a defensive stance, to create a headline that painted the administration as heartless. What the reporter didn't realize, he had just walked into a trap of his own. Because Karoline wasn't about to back down, she wasn't going to let him twist the narrative. And in the next few minutes, she would turn the tables so brutally, so efficiently, that the entire room would be left in stunned silence. No one, not even the reporter himself, was prepared for what came next. A tense silence lingered in the briefing room as Karoline Leavitt met the NBC reporter's gaze. She didn't flinch. She didn't rush to answer. Instead, she let his loaded question hang in the air just long enough for everyone to feel the weight of what was about to happen. The reporter adjusted his posture, sensing an opportunity. "These policies are tearing families apart," he continued, pushing the narrative. "Why is this administration refusing to show basic human compassion?" There it was, the bait. A question not meant to seek truth but to frame the administration as villains, to paint them into a corner where no answer would be good enough. If Karoline defended the policy, they'd call her cruel. If she tried to soften the stance, they'd accuse the administration of hypocrisy. But Karoline wasn't playing their game. She exhaled, keeping her tone even but sharp. "So let me get this straight," she said, leaning slightly forward. "Are you suggesting that enforcing federal law is now inhumane?" The question hit hard. The reporter hesitated for the briefest moment, blinking as if recalculating his next move. Karoline didn't wait for a response. She continued, her voice steady. "Because when previous administrations, ones that you and your network openly supported, enforced deportation laws, I don't remember you or NBC using words like cruelty and inhumane. In fact, I don't remember you questioning those policies at all." The tension in the room skyrocketed. Reporters shuffled uncomfortably in their seats. Some exchanged knowing glances, already sensing that this exchange was slipping out of the NBC reporter's control. But Karoline was just getting started. The NBC reporter tried to interrupt, but she held up a hand. "No, let's be very clear here," she said. "Your network has spent years telling the American people that our immigration system is broken. And yet, the moment this administration actually enforces the law, suddenly it's a moral crisis." The words landed like a gut punch. The NBC reporter's confidence visibly shrank. He had expected Karoline to stumble, to evade, to deflect. Instead, she was going on offense, turning his own logic against him. The cameras captured everything: the shift in energy, the reporter's sudden uncertainty, the press room hanging on to every word. And just like that, what was supposed to be an attack on the administration had backfired spectacularly. And Karoline, she wasn't even close to being done. The room was silent. The NBC reporter, who just moments ago was brimming with confidence, now found himself on unstable ground. But Karoline wasn't finished, not even close. She straightened in her seat, letting her words cut through the tense air. "Let's talk about compassion for a moment," she said, "because your network seems to have selective outrage when it comes to border security." The reporter opened his mouth to respond, but Karoline kept going. "For years, illegal immigration has exploited vulnerable people, flooded our communities with drugs, and overwhelmed our resources. The same laws that this administration is enforcing today have been in place for decades. But when past presidents, ones that NBC supported, did the exact same thing, where was this outrage?" A ripple of tension moved through the room. Some reporters shifted in their seats, glancing at each other, while others kept their heads down, frantically typing. The NBC reporter tried again. "But this administration's policies..." Karoline didn't let him finish. "Did you ask these same questions in 2014? she shot back. Or was it only when it became politically convenient for your network? Boom. The words landed hard. A direct, unshakable challenge, one the reporter hadn't prepared for. He fumbled with his notes, glancing around, realizing he was losing control. The camera zoomed in, capturing every flicker of discomfort on his face. The tension in the room was undeniable. Karoline wasn't just defending the administration. She was exposing the media's blatant hypocrisy, tearing apart their attempt to frame the narrative. And everyone watching, both in the room and online, could see it. The NBC reporter had nowhere left to go. And Karoline, she wasn't even finished yet. The NBC reporter blinked rapidly, visibly thrown off by Karoline's unflinching response. This wasn't how the exchange was supposed to go. He had expected a defensive answer, a vague deflection, anything but this. Desperately trying to regain control, he cleared his throat and forced a weak smile. "I think the real question here," he said, his voice faltering slightly, "is whether this administration is willing to acknowledge the humanitarian concerns raised by these deportations. Surely you can't deny the emotional toll." Karoline tilted her head slightly as if waiting for something more substantial. But nothing came. Just a flimsy attempt to shift the conversation. A weak pivot to emotion over facts. She leaned forward, her expression calm but unwavering. "So, just to be clear," she said, her voice measured, "are you saying that enforcing immigration laws passed by Congress and upheld by multiple administrations, should be ignored because of emotional toll?" The reporter hesitated, his confidence crumbling by the second. Karoline continued, "Let me ask you this. Where was this level of concern when the previous administration deported over 3 million people? Where was this outrage then?" The room was dead silent. The NBC reporter opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He glanced down at his notes, searching for a way out. But there wasn't one, because no amount of spin, no last-minute excuse could undo the reality Karoline had just laid out in front of the entire room. She had turned the tables completely, forcing the media, and this reporter in particular, to confront their own contradictions. The camera zoomed in on his tightened jaw, his shifting posture, the beads of nervous energy radiating from his seat. This wasn't just a bad moment for the reporter. This was a complete unraveling of his argument, and Karoline, she knew it. She sat back waiting, letting the silence drag on just long enough for the weight of the moment to settle in. For the first time in that briefing room, it wasn't Karoline who had to explain herself, it was the media. The tension in the press briefing room was palpable. The NBC reporter sat frozen, his carefully crafted argument falling apart before his eyes. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by uncertainty. Karoline Leavitt saw it, and she wasn't about to let up. She leaned slightly forward, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "You still haven't answered my question." The reporter shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I just think—" Karoline didn't let him finish. "No, let's be precise here." Her tone was direct, cutting through his hesitation. "You are standing here today claiming that this administration's enforcement of immigration law is inhumane and unprecedented. But history and facts prove otherwise." She glanced around the room, making sure every journalist was listening. "So, tell me, was it inhumane when the Obama administration carried out over 400,000 deportations in a single year?" The NBC reporter's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "Was it unprecedented when the previous administration separated families at the border under policies that were first implemented in 1997? Or," she continued, her voice never wavering, "does this outrage only appear when it's politically convenient for networks like yours?" The air felt thick, the entire room hanging on to every word. The NBC reporter, realizing he was completely cornered, tried to recover. "That's not what I'm saying is that—" Karoline cut right through it. "No, what you're saying is that enforcing immigration law is only a problem when this administration does it." She let the statement settle. "You want to hold this administration to a different standard while conveniently ignoring history." The NBC reporter swallowed hard. "Let me make one thing very clear," she said, her voice strong, unwavering. "This administration is enforcing the law, the same law that has existed for decades. If you have a problem with that, I suggest you direct your frustration toward Congress, the people responsible for writing these laws." Boom! The words hit like a hammer. A few murmurs rippled through the room. Reporters exchanged quick glances, some frantically typing notes, others staring at the NBC reporter, waiting for his next move. But there wasn't one, because Karoline had just dismantled his entire premise in real time. The NBC reporter sat silent, deflated, his once dominant stance now reduced to nothing. Karoline sat back, her job done. She didn't smirk, she didn't gloat, because she didn't have to. The moment spoke for itself. And the media? They had just been completely exposed. For a full 5 seconds, the room was completely silent. No reporters shouting over one another, no hurried follow-ups, just dead silence. The kind that only happens when something undeniable has just taken place. The NBC reporter sat frozen, his confidence shattered. He looked down at his notes, flipping through pages as if the answer he needed was buried somewhere within them. But everyone in the room knew. There was no comeback. Karoline Leavitt had just turned the entire briefing on its head, and for once the media didn't know how to react. A few reporters shifted in their seats, exchanging quick glances. Some furiously typed on their laptops, trying to capture the moment in real time. The ones who had been smirking minutes earlier were now avoiding eye contact altogether. Then, from the back of the room, a low chuckle. One of the veteran reporters, someone who had seen these briefings play out countless times, shook his head with a smirk, clearly amused. He wasn't a fan of the administration, but even he could see what had just happened. Karoline had outmaneuvered the media, again. The press briefing was supposed to be a coordinated attack, an attempt to frame the administration as heartless, but instead, the media had just been put on trial, and they had no defense. A Fox News journalist leaned in toward his colleague and whispered something, both of them nodding in agreement. Meanwhile, a CNN correspondent typed furiously, trying to reshape the narrative before it was too late. But there was no spin strong enough to erase what had just unfolded on live television, because the clip was already spreading. Cameras had captured every second the NBC reporter's initial arrogance, Karoline's sharp and precise takedown, and most importantly, the exact moment he realized he had lost. The press room was no longer in control of the story, and Karoline? She simply sat back, composed, calm, unshaken. She had set the record straight, and there was nothing the media could do to undo it. The press briefing had barely ended when the real chaos began. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. Social media timelines flooded with reaction videos, hot takes, and memes, all dissecting the moment Karoline Leavitt completely dismantled the NBC reporter. Trending hashtags dominated Twitter. Hashtag Karoline shuts them down. Hashtag NBC exposed. Hashtag media bias unmasked. Hashtag Leavitt clapback. Millions of people rushed to watch the clip, commenting in real time. She didn't just answer the question, she obliterated the entire premise. This wasn't a press briefing, this was a masterclass in handling media hypocrisy. The NBC guy thought he had a gotcha moment, and instead got absolutely wrecked. And this is why Karoline Leavitt terrifies the media. Conservative influencers wasted no time reacting. Fox News ran the headline, Karoline Leavitt destroys NBC reporter in brutal exchange, must-see TV. The Daily Wire posted, watch, NBC reporter gets humiliated after trying to corner Karoline Leavitt. Ben Shapiro retweeted the clip, adding, this is why they can't stand her, she tells the truth, and they have no answer for it. Meanwhile, the left-wing media was in full damage control mode. CNN called it a contentious exchange but downplayed Karoline's response. MSNBC claimed the clip was being misinterpreted and taken out of context. The New York Times published a rushed op-ed. Did Karoline Leavitt dodge the real question? But it didn't matter, because every time they tried to spin it, people just went back and watched the unedited clip. And every time they watched, they saw exactly what happened. An NBC reporter fumbling through his own argument while Karoline methodically dismantled every word. By midday, the clip had hit 10 million views. By nightfall, 25 million. By the end of the week, it was officially one of the most watched political press briefing moments in years. And Karoline? She didn't even need to say another word, because the internet was already doing it for her. The mainstream media was completely blindsided, and now they were scrambling to regain control of the narrative. They had spent years setting the rules, carefully crafting the image that they were the ones asking the tough questions, holding power accountable and controlling the national conversation. But in just a matter of minutes, Karoline Leavitt had flipped the script, turning the press briefing into a reckoning for their hypocrisy and selective outrage. And now, they had no choice but to fight back. By the time the morning talk shows went live, the damage control operation was in full force. Every major liberal outlet ran frantic coverage of the viral moment, trying desperately to reshape the narrative before it spiraled even further out of their control. CNN went into overdrive, kicking off the day with a segment titled, "Karoline Leavitt's Contentious Exchange with NBC Reporter Raises Questions About White House Messaging." They carefully cherry-picked moments from the exchange, slicing out the most devastating points Karoline made and reframing the encounter as a political stunt rather than an exposure of their own double standards. Some are calling this a victory for the right, one CNN anchor began, shaking his head. But in reality, this was a deflection, an attempt to dodge a serious question. Their panel of experts nodded in agreement. Not one of them addressed the fact that millions of people had already seen the full unedited clip, and that no amount of media spin could erase what really happened. Over at MSNBC, the framing took an even more desperate turn. Instead of trying to argue the facts, they pivoted to a new strategy: emotional manipulation. Karoline Leavitt's confrontational approach raises concerns about political discourse. A panelist sighed dramatically, his voice dripping with faux concern. This wasn't about accountability, this was an outright attack on journalism. Another journalist chimed in, clutching his pen like a lifeline. We need to ask ourselves, when did it become okay to treat reporters this way? They ignored the fact that the NBC reporter had tried to corner Karoline first, had misrepresented the facts, and had been caught completely off guard when she didn't back down. Instead, they pushed a victim narrative because it was the only move they had left. And it wasn't just TV networks. The Washington Post quickly published an op-ed, clearly written in a rush to control the damage. Did Karoline Leavitt really win, or did she just dodge the question? The piece was filled with mental gymnastics, claiming that the press secretary had twisted the narrative, even though the full video showed otherwise. It was textbook damage control, but it was failing miserably, because every time one of these outlets tried to spin the moment, people went back to the original clip, and every time they watched it, they saw exactly what happened. An NBC reporter fumbling through his own words while Karoline dismantled his argument with ease. Conservative media, on the other hand, wasn't letting this moment go to waste. Fox News aired back-to-back segments, playing the entire exchange unedited, and calling out the media's attempt to rewrite history. Karoline Leavitt just exposed the press for what they really are. The Daily Wire posted an in-depth breakdown, analyzing every second of the takedown and countering each new media spin attempt in real time. NBC reporter walks into a trap. Karoline Leavitt shuts him down instantly. Ben Shapiro tweeted, "The media is in full meltdown mode because someone actually called them out on their lies and they had nothing to say in return. And the engagement off the charts, every tweet, every reaction video, every post pushing back against the media spin was getting more traction than the network's own stories." At this point, it was clear. The mainstream media had lost control of the story. Even liberal outlets who usually stayed out of these fights couldn't ignore what was happening. One independent journalist on Twitter put it bluntly, "I don't even like Karoline, but let's be real. She wiped the floor with that reporter, and now the media is in full damage control mode." By the end of the day, the numbers spoke for themselves. The original clip had over 40 million views across social media. Conservative reaction videos were outranking CNN and MSNBC's coverage. Polls showed a sharp decline in trust in the mainstream press. The media had tried to control the narrative, but instead they had made it worse because for once the American people weren't being told what to think. They were watching the truth unfold in real time, and no amount of spin could change what they had already seen with their own eyes. If the media thought Karoline Leavitt was going to back down after her fiery exchange with the NBC reporter, they were dead wrong. By the next morning, the entire media machine was in damage control mode, spinning the confrontation into their own version of events. They plastered their headlines with phrases like heated clash, contentious moment, and Trump's press secretary lashes out at journalist. The same outlets that had cheered when liberal press secretaries dismissed conservative reporters as not serious were now demanding civility because this time the one holding the microphone wasn't afraid to fight back. They pushed the narrative that Karoline had dodged the NBC reporter's question, that she had turned the press conference into an attack rather than engaging in honest dialogue. MSNBC's morning panel shook their heads in dismay, claiming that her response was an example of dangerous rhetoric and a war on the free press. But there was one problem: the entire exchange had been caught on camera. Millions of Americans had already seen what actually happened. Karoline hadn't dodged anything. She had simply turned the question around and forced the media to confront their own hypocrisy, and they hated it. But instead of retreating, Karoline did the exact opposite. By the time she stepped up to the podium the next day, the media expected her to soften her tone, to walk back her comments, maybe even offer a carefully worded clarification to ease the tension. Instead, she came in prepared to bury them. The first question of the day was predictable. A reporter from CNN, clearly trying to steer the narrative, framed his question in a way that implied Karoline had been unprofessional and evasive. "There's been widespread criticism of your remarks yesterday, with some saying you refused to directly answer the NBC reporter's question and instead attacked the media as a whole. Do you stand by your response?" Karoline didn't hesitate for a second. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice measured. "The only people criticizing my remarks are the ones in this room, and it's not because I dodged a question. It's because I answered it in a way that made them uncomfortable." A few reporters shifted in their seats. Others quickly jotted down notes, sensing that this was about to be another viral moment. "I said what I said yesterday because it was the truth. And the reason the media is scrambling today is because they know that millions of Americans saw it for themselves. They don't need to be told what to think by an edited headline. They watched the full clip and they understand exactly what happened." Boom. Another direct hit. The same sharp, unwavering stare she had given the NBC reporter yesterday was back. She was in control of the room, and everyone there knew it. Another reporter jumped in, trying to salvage the moment for the press. "So, just to clarify, you're saying the media is lying about this exchange?" Karoline turned her attention toward him, her expression unreadable. "I don't have to say anything. The footage speaks for itself. If the media wants to keep spinning, that's their choice. But the American people are smart enough to know when they're being lied to." The room fell silent, and then, just like the day before, the clip went viral, instantly. Within minutes, conservative media jumped on it. Fox News ran with the headline, "Karoline Leavitt doubles down, tells the media to their faces, the footage speaks for itself." Ben Shapiro retweeted the clip, adding, "This is what it looks like when you don't let the media control the story." The Daily Wire posted an in-depth segment titled, "They tried to spin the story. Karoline just set the record straight." The engagement numbers were skyrocketing. The first clip had already surpassed 50 million views. The new clip was climbing even faster. Polls showed a spike in public distrust toward the mainstream media. Meanwhile, liberal news outlets were completely lost on how to respond. CNN refused to air the full exchange, instead carefully editing her response to make it seem like she was being unnecessarily combative. MSNBC brought on a panelist to claim that Karoline's remarks were dangerous, that she was inciting distrust in journalism. But none of it mattered. Because this wasn't a fight Karoline had picked, it was a fight the media had started, and now they were losing. And for the first time in a long time, the entire press establishment realized something terrifying. They were no longer in control of the narrative. Because no amount of damage control could erase what millions of Americans had already seen with their own eyes. The moment had passed, but the ripple effects were only just beginning. What started as a routine press briefing had escalated into a full-scale media firestorm. A defining moment that didn't just expose one journalist's bias but laid bare the media's entire playbook, their selective outrage, their double standards, and their absolute fear of losing control over the narrative. This wasn't just about one viral moment. This was about a fundamental shift in how Americans viewed the press, a shift that had been building for years but had now reached a breaking point. Because for years, mainstream journalists operated under the illusion that they were untouchable. They believed they could frame any story however they wanted. They believed they could manipulate facts without consequence. They believed they could trap, humiliate, and dismiss conservative voices and get away with it. But Karoline Leavitt had just shattered that illusion in real time. The press had walked into that briefing expecting to control the conversation. Instead, they became the story. The media had spent the past 24 hours scrambling for damage control, running hit pieces, twisting Karoline's words, and insisting that she was somehow in the wrong. But none of it worked, because the raw, unedited footage was already out there. 100 million plus views across platforms. Trending for days across social media. Polls showing skyrocketing distrust in the mainstream press. And that's what truly terrified them. They couldn't spin the facts anymore because millions of Americans had already seen them for themselves. The fallout was immediate. CNN's credibility took yet another hit, as their fact-checking segment was picked apart by independent analysts who exposed just how much they had twisted the story. NBC was forced to distance itself from their own reporter, avoiding direct questions about his attempt to frame Karoline. MSNBC's panel segment flopped, with viewers outraged at the network's blatant refusal to air the full exchange. The media had spent years calling Trump's press secretaries combative and controversial for daring to challenge them. But this was different. This time, the media didn't just lose the debate, they lost the public's trust. And Karoline knew it. She didn't need to gloat, she didn't need to issue follow-ups, she didn't need to clarify her remarks. She let the facts and the footage speak for themselves. "If the media wants to continue misleading the public, that's up to them," she said when asked about the controversy the next day. "But the American people are smart enough to see the truth for themselves." Boom, another moment, another win. But this wasn't just about one press briefing or one media takedown. This was about a much larger battle, one that had been brewing for years. For too long, mainstream news outlets controlled the flow of information. They got to choose what was news and what wasn't. They got to decide what was misinformation and what was fact. They got to frame every story to fit their political agenda. But now, that power was slipping, because for the first time in decades, millions of Americans were questioning everything they were being told. They were watching the full clips, not just the cherry-picked edits. They were seeing the contradictions, the lies, the hypocrisy. They were turning away from legacy media and getting their information from sources they actually trusted. And that's why this moment mattered. It wasn't just about Karoline Leavitt. It wasn't just about one hostile NBC reporter. It was about who controls the truth. For decades, the press had dictated the national conversation, deciding what was worth covering, what was worth ignoring, and who was allowed to speak. But this press briefing proved one thing beyond a doubt. That era was over. The people were now in control of the narrative, and Karoline Leavitt had just delivered a moment that ensured they would never forget it.